You have her eyes. The stranger whispered those 4 words beside Laura Harrington's grave, and then she turned away as if she had never been there. Emily Harrington stood frozen beneath the gray November sky, one hand tightening around the umbrella handle, the other resting against her coat pocket where her mother's old photograph still waited. For 7 years, Emily had visited this cemetery on the same Sunday every November. She came alone. She brought white roses. She stood quietly, remembered her mother, and left before the ache became too heavy. But that morning was different. A woman in a long charcoal coat had arrived before her and placed a small gift beneath Laura's name. No flowers, no card, just a narrow wooden box wrapped in faded blue cloth. Emily took 3 steps forward. "Who are you?" The woman stopped. "Did you know my mother?" No answer. "Why did you leave that here?" The woman slowly looked over her shoulder. Her face was pale, her silver hair moving softly in the cold wind. "Your mother asked me to." Emily's breath caught. "Asked you to do what?" The woman looked at her for one long second. "Wait." Then she walked toward the cemetery gate. Emily followed. "Wait. What is your name?" The woman kept walking. "Please." Still nothing. The sound of her shoes faded over the wet stone path. Emily stopped beneath an old maple tree. Rain tapped against her umbrella. The cemetery seemed suddenly enormous, quiet except for the wind moving through bare branches. She turned back toward her mother's grave. The blue-wrapped box was still there. For a moment, she simply stared at it. Then she knelt. Her fingers touched the cloth. It was old, carefully folded, and tied with a thin piece of white string. She untied it slowly. Inside was a brass key, a photograph, and a small handwritten note. Emily picked up the photograph first. Her mother stood outside a house Emily had never seen. She looked younger, happier, almost unguarded. Beside her stood a man Emily did not recognize. On the back of the photograph was a date from 23 years earlier. Then she opened the note. Only one sentence had been written. "For Emily, when she is finally ready to know the truth." Emily read it once. Then again. Her mother had always been the center of her world, even after death. Laura had taught her that money meant nothing without character, that dignity did not need an audience, and that some truths were worth waiting for. But Emily had never imagined that her mother had left behind a secret. She looked toward the gate where the woman had disappeared. Empty. No footsteps. No answer. Just silence. Emily turned the brass key over in her palm. A number had been engraved on it. 17. She stared at it, feeling something inside her shift. 7 years of grief had taught her how to live without answers. But standing there beneath the cold November sky, Emily realized something else. Her mother had not left her only memories. She had left her a door, and somewhere, waiting behind it, was the truth. Emily stayed beside her mother's grave long after the rain began to soften, the brass key resting cold against her palm. She kept staring at the number 17, trying to remember whether she had ever heard her mother mention it. She had not. Laura Harrington had been careful with secrets, but she had never seemed like a woman who needed them. At least, that was what Emily had believed. She slipped the photograph and the note back into the wooden box, then looked toward the cemetery entrance one more time. The mysterious woman was gone. Whoever she was, she had known Laura. She had known Emily. And somehow, she had known exactly when Emily would be ready. The thought followed Emily all the way home. By the time she reached her townhouse in Boston, the rain had turned into a steady winter drizzle. She placed the wooden box on the kitchen table and made a cup of coffee, but she never took a sip. Her attention remained fixed on the photograph. The house in the picture looked familiar, but not because she had ever been there. Something about the porch, the white railing, and the tall oak tree beside the driveway stirred a faint memory from childhood. Emily closed her eyes. Her mother had once taken her somewhere like this. She could almost hear Laura laughing. Then the memory disappeared. "Why did you never tell me?" Emily whispered. Her phone rang. It was her longtime friend, Claire Morgan. Emily answered. "I found something at Mom's grave." Claire went quiet. "What kind of something?" "A key, a photograph, and a note from my mother." "Emily, what does it say?" Emily read it aloud. "For Emily, when she is finally ready to know the truth." Claire breathed slowly. "That does not sound like a normal birthday letter." Emily almost smiled, but the feeling vanished. "There is more." She turned the photograph over. "There is a date and a house I do not recognize. Then maybe we should find it." Emily looked at the brass key. 17. What does that mean? I do not know yet. The next morning, Emily drove to the public records office downtown. She had expected a simple search, but the old property records took hours to review. The house in the photograph had once belonged to a woman named Margaret Cole. Emily recognized the name immediately. Her mother had mentioned Margaret exactly once when Emily was a teenager. Laura had simply called her an old friend and changed the subject. Now the name felt different. It felt like a door opening. Emily searched the address and found that the property had been sold 22 years earlier. The current owner was listed as someone else, but an old forwarding record remained attached to the file. Emily wrote down the address. Then she noticed something that made her stop breathing for a moment. The forwarding address was only 6 miles from her home. She left the building just before noon. 6 miles later, she pulled up outside a modest blue house with white shutters. Before she could knock, the front door opened. A little girl stood there holding a paper snowflake. She looked at Emily with curious eyes. "Are you looking for my dad?" Emily blinked. "I think I am looking for someone who used to know my mother." The girl smiled politely. "Then you probably want my daddy." A man appeared behind her. He was tall, quietly dressed, and carried the calm expression of someone who had learned not to rush through life. "I am Ethan Carter," he said. Emily looked at him, then at the house behind him. For reasons she could not explain, the sight of his face made the strange key in her pocket feel suddenly heavier. Ethan noticed the wooden box in her hands. His expression changed. "Where did you get that?" Emily swallowed. "At my mother's grave." Ethan looked at the box for several seconds. Then he stepped aside. "You should come in." "Where did you get that?" Ethan asked again, his voice quieter this time. Emily held the wooden box against her chest and stepped inside the blue house. The warmth of the living room felt strangely comforting after the cold cemetery and the long drive across Boston. A little girl sat at the kitchen table, carefully folding another paper snowflake. "I am Lily," she said. "My daddy makes hot chocolate when people look sad." Emily gave her a small smile. "That sounds like a good habit." Ethan glanced toward his daughter. "Lily, why do you not finish your snowflake in the living room?" Lily looked between them, understood the quiet message, and carried her paper to the couch. Ethan waited until she was out of earshot. "That box belonged to Laura Harrington." Emily nodded. "My mother." Ethan looked down at the floor for a moment. "I knew she would come back to this house someday." Emily felt her heart tighten. "What does that mean?" "I do not know if she ever came here after I was born. My father kept this place for years." Emily looked around. "Your father?" "Daniel Carter." The name meant nothing to her. Ethan walked to an old bookshelf and pulled down a faded photograph. He handed it to Emily. She stared at the image. Her mother stood beside a younger Daniel Carter outside the same house from the photograph she had found at the cemetery. There was no mistaking it. The white railing, the oak tree, the same quiet smile on Laura's face. "How did my mother know your father?" Emily asked. Ethan shook his head. "That is what I have been trying to understand." He sat down across from her. "My father died when I was 17. He never talked much about his work or the people he knew. But after he died, I found several letters from your mother." Emily looked up sharply. "Letters? I did not read them." Ethan paused. "They were personal. I thought some things should remain private." Emily studied him. "Then why did you keep them?" "Because one day he told me that if a woman named Laura Harrington ever came looking for something, I was supposed to give it to her." Emily looked at the wooden box. "But she never came." "No," Ethan's eyes moved toward the box. "And neither did you." Until today. The room became still. From the other side of the house came the soft sound of Lily humming while she folded paper. Emily opened the box again. The brass key caught the afternoon light. "Do you know what this opens?" she asked. Ethan leaned closer but did not touch it. "Maybe. You have seen it before?" "Not the key." He looked at the number engraved on its surface. "But I have seen that number." Emily waited. "Where?" Ethan stood and walked toward a small wooden cabinet near the hallway. He opened the bottom drawer and took out a worn envelope. The paper was yellowed with age. On the front, written in Daniel Carter's handwriting, was a single number. 17. Emily felt the room shift beneath her. "What is inside?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "I do not know." He turned the envelope over. It had never been opened. "My father left this for me, but he also wrote one sentence on the back." Emily looked at him. "What sentence?" Ethan read it quietly. "Do not open this unless Laura's daughter comes to you." Emily stared at him. 7 years of unanswered questions suddenly had a shape. The stranger at the grave, the wooden box, the photograph, the key, and now a sealed envelope waiting in Ethan Carter's house. Lily appeared in the doorway holding her paper snowflake. "Daddy." Ethan turned. "Yes, sweetheart." She looked at Emily and smiled. "Mommy always said secrets are heavy until somebody is ready to carry them." Ethan went completely still. Emily looked at the little girl. "What did you say?" Lily shrugged. "My mommy used to say that." Emily lowered her eyes to the envelope. For the first time, she wondered whether the woman who had left the gift at her mother's grave was not trying to hide the past at all. Maybe she was finally bringing it home. "Do not open it." Ethan's voice was calm, but something in it made Emily stop. She held the sealed envelope between her fingers and looked at him. "Why?" she asked. Ethan glanced toward the hallway where Lily had disappeared. "Because my father spent years making sure it stayed closed." Emily looked down at the handwriting again. The number 17 seemed almost ordinary, yet it had followed her from the cemetery to this house, as if someone had carefully placed each piece along a path she was only beginning to understand. "My mother left me that box," Emily said. "Your father left you this envelope. They cannot both be coincidences." Ethan did not argue. He carried the envelope to the kitchen table and placed it beside the wooden box. Outside, the afternoon light had begun to fade, turning the windows silver beneath the November clouds. Lily returned with 3 mugs of hot chocolate and set them carefully on the table. "One is for you," she told Emily. "Daddy says people think better when they are warm." Emily smiled. "Your daddy sounds wise." Lily looked at Ethan. "He is sometimes." Ethan gave his daughter a gentle look. "Sometimes. Sometimes," Lily repeated with a grin before returning to the living room. Emily watched her go. "She is sweet. She keeps this house lighter than it used to be," Ethan said. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emily reached for the envelope. "I am opening it." Ethan nodded slowly. The seal was old, but intact. Emily carefully unfolded the paper inside. There was no letter, only a small photograph and a handwritten address. She recognized the photograph immediately. It showed her mother standing beside Daniel Carter, but this time they were not outside the blue house. They were sitting at a diner booth, smiling over 2 cups of coffee. On the back, Daniel had written a date. The date was exactly 1 week before Laura died. Emily stared at it. "My mother never mentioned your father." "Mine never mentioned her either," Ethan replied. "But they clearly knew each other." Emily turned the photograph over again. Beneath the date was another sentence. "If Laura cannot tell Emily herself, take her to the place where the promise began." Emily looked at the address. It was not the house. It was a small diner on the outskirts of Boston, one that had been operating for more than 30 years. "We need to go there," she said. Ethan nodded. "Tomorrow morning." Emily looked at him. "Why not tonight?" Ethan glanced toward the darkening windows. "Because you have been carrying 7 years of questions, Emily. You do not have to solve all of them in one night." His words settled over her with unexpected warmth. She had spent years believing that answers were something she had to chase alone. Yet here was a man she had met only hours earlier, sitting quietly across from her, asking nothing from her except patience. The thought made her uncomfortable in a way she could not explain. Not because she distrusted him, but because she had forgotten what it felt like to let someone stand beside her grief. Emily placed the photograph back into the envelope. "There is something else," she said. Ethan looked at her. "What?" "The woman at the cemetery said my mother asked her to leave the gift." Ethan's expression became thoughtful. "Did she give you her name?" "No." "Did she say anything else?" Emily remembered the woman turning toward her beneath the gray sky. She remembered those 4 quiet words. "She said I have my mother's eyes." Ethan lowered his gaze. "Then she knew Laura very well." "You think she was Margaret Cole?" Emily asked. Ethan was silent. After a moment, he opened an old family notebook and turned several pages. Near the back was a name written in Daniel's handwriting. Margaret Cole. Beneath it were 3 words that made Emily's heart stop for a different reason. She kept the promise. Emily looked at Ethan. "What promise?" He slowly closed the notebook. "I do not know." Then the doorbell rang. Both of them turned toward the front door. Ethan stood first and walked to the window. A woman in a charcoal coat stood on the porch. Emily recognized her immediately. It was the woman from the cemetery. She was holding another small package. And this time, she had come directly to their door. "Do not open the door," Emily whispered. Ethan looked at her, then toward the woman standing quietly on the porch. She had the same charcoal coat, the same silver hair, and the same unreadable expression Emily had seen at her mother's grave. Lily stood at the end of the hallway, holding her paper snowflake against her chest. "Daddy," she said softly, "is that the lady from the picture?" Emily turned. "What picture?" Lily pointed toward the photograph on the kitchen table. Ethan looked at it, then back at the woman outside. His face changed. "Stay here," he told Lily gently. Then he opened the door. The woman did not step inside. She simply looked at Ethan, then at Emily. "I was hoping you would find each other," she said. Emily moved closer. "Who are you?" The woman took a slow breath. "My name is Margaret Cole." Emily felt the name settle into the room like an answer that had arrived years too late. "You knew my mother." Margaret nodded. "For most of her life." Ethan remained near the doorway. "And you knew my father." Margaret looked at him. "Yes." Neither Emily nor Ethan spoke. Margaret held out the small package in her hands. This belonged to Laura. Emily accepted it carefully. The package was wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with blue thread. "Why did you leave the first gift at her grave?" Emily asked. Margaret looked down for a moment. "Because your mother asked me to." 7 years ago? No, Margaret's voice softened. "Long before that." Emily frowned. "Then why wait?" Margaret looked directly into her eyes. "Because Laura told me there would come a day when you would stop looking at her death and start looking at her life." The words reached Emily more deeply than she expected. Her mother's death had always been the center of every memory. The hospital calls, the quiet house, the empty chair at the kitchen table, the years of wondering whether she could have done something differently. But Margaret was asking her to see Laura as a woman who had lived, loved, worked, dreamed, and kept promises. Emily looked down at the package. "What is inside?" Margaret hesitated. "Something she wanted you to have when you were ready." Emily untied the blue thread. Inside was a small silver locket. She recognized it immediately. Her mother had worn it when Emily was a child. "I thought this was lost," Emily whispered. Margaret shook her head. "Laura gave it to me the week before she died." Emily opened the locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of Emily at about 6 years old, smiling beside her mother. On the other side was a handwritten word. "Home." Emily pressed her fingers against the photograph. Her eyes filled with tears. Margaret watched quietly. "Your mother loved you more than anything," she said. "Then why did she leave so many unanswered questions?" Emily asked. Margaret looked toward Ethan. "Because some answers would have changed your life before you were ready to understand them." Ethan stepped closer. "What happened between Laura and my father?" Margaret's expression became solemn. "They made a promise." "What promise?" Emily asked. Margaret did not answer immediately. She looked at the photograph of Laura and Daniel on the table. "They promised to protect someone." Ethan's voice was quiet. "Who?" Margaret looked at Emily. "You." Emily felt the room grow still. She shook her head. "Protect me from what?" Margaret looked toward the old envelope marked with the number 17. "From a truth that had nothing to do with money." Emily stared at her. "Then what did it have to do with?" Margaret's eyes filled with a sadness that seemed older than any of them. "Your mother discovered something about the people closest to her. She knew that if the truth came out too soon, it would change everything you believed about your family." Ethan looked at the photograph again. "And my father helped her?" Margaret nodded. "Daniel was the only person she trusted completely." Emily held the locket close to her heart. "What was the truth?" Margaret looked toward the dark window, where the evening rain had begun again. "You will find it tomorrow," she said. "At the diner." Emily remembered the address from the envelope. Margaret reached into her coat and placed one final piece of paper on the table. "There is one thing you need to know before you go." Emily unfolded it. It was an old receipt from the diner, dated 7 days before Laura died. On the back, in Laura's handwriting, were 6 words. "Meet me there if I disappear." Emily looked up. Margaret was already walking toward the porch. "Wait," Emily called. Margaret stopped. "Why did you come?" "Tonight." Margaret turned slowly. "Because tomorrow, you are going to learn why your mother trusted Daniel Carter." Then she stepped into the rain and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Emily with the locket, the receipt, and a question that had suddenly become impossible to ignore. "Your father did not betray my mother," Emily whispered, staring at the old receipt. "He was trying to help her." Ethan looked at the words on the paper again, then at the silver locket resting beside it. The rain tapped softly against the windows, filling the silence Margaret had left behind. Neither of them wanted to say what they were thinking. Daniel Carter and Laura Harrington had shared a secret for years. Now, after 7 years of questions, Emily finally had a reason to believe that secret had been meant to protect her. Ethan picked up the envelope marked 17. "We should go to the diner in the morning." Emily nodded. "Together." He looked at her. "Together." The next morning arrived beneath a pale winter sky. At 7:30, Ethan was already in the kitchen preparing coffee, while Lily sat at the table drawing another paper snowflake. Emily stood near the window, holding her mother's locket. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Laura standing beside Daniel in that old photograph, smiling as if the two of them had shared a life Emily had never known. Lily looked up. "Are you nervous?" Emily smiled faintly. "A little." Lily pushed a paper snowflake across the table. "You can take this." Emily picked it up. "For luck. For courage." Ethan smiled from the coffee maker. "She has been saving that one." Emily looked at the delicate paper shape. "Thank you, Lily." "You are welcome." At 8:15, Ethan drove them to the diner. It sat on a quiet corner outside the city, exactly where the old address had led them. The sign above the entrance read Maple Street Diner. Its red lettering had faded with time, but the place looked warm and familiar. Inside, the scent of coffee and fresh pancakes filled the air. An elderly waitress greeted them and pointed toward a booth near the back. "You are looking for the Carter table, right?" Ethan stopped. "How? Did you know?" The waitress smiled gently. "Your father used to sit there every Thursday morning." Emily and Ethan exchanged a look. They walked to the booth. On the wall behind it hung a framed photograph of the diner from decades earlier. Laura and Daniel were visible in the corner. Emily touched the glass. "She came here often." The waitress nodded. "Your mother came here for years." Emily turned. "You knew her?" Everyone knew Laura. The woman set 2 menus on the table. She was kind, always asked about the staff, always left a handwritten note with her payment. Emily felt something warm move through the sadness in her chest. "Do you remember the last time she came here?" The waitress grew quiet. "Yes." Ethan leaned forward. "What happened?" "She came with Daniel." The waitress glanced toward the kitchen. "They sat right here. They talked for a long time. Your mother looked worried, but Daniel kept telling her to trust the plan." Emily's heart beat faster. "What plan?" The waitress shook her head. "I never knew the details. But before they left, Laura gave me an envelope." Emily looked at Ethan. "An envelope?" "Yes. She told me to keep it until someone came asking about the blue house." Ethan slowly reached for Emily's hand, then stopped, giving her the choice. Emily took his hand. It was a simple gesture, quiet and steady. The waitress disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a small metal box. She placed it on the table. "This was left here 23 years ago." Emily looked at the box. "Why did nobody open it?" The waitress smiled sadly. "Because your mother asked us not to." Emily took the brass key from her coat pocket. The number 17 caught the morning light. She inserted it into the lock. The box opened with a soft click. Inside was a single folded letter. Emily unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. Laura had written her name at the top. "Emily, if you are reading this, then Daniel kept his promise." Emily stopped breathing for a moment. Ethan looked at the letter. Beneath the first sentence was another line. "And if Daniel's son is standing beside you, then the time has finally come." Ethan stared at the page. Emily looked at him. Neither spoke. The diner seemed to fade around them. Then Emily read the final sentence aloud. "Ask him what his father was protecting you from." Ethan slowly lowered his eyes. "I think I know where we need to go next." "Your father was protecting me from what?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan did not answer immediately. The old letter remained open on the diner table between them, Laura's handwriting staring back at them like a voice from another time. Outside, cars moved along Maple Street, tires whispering over damp pavement. But inside the booth, everything felt still. Ethan folded his hands together. "I need to tell you something I should have understood years ago." Emily waited. "After my father died, I found a second box in his study. I was 17, and I did not know what any of it meant. There were copies of documents, letters, and a name I recognized from your mother's company." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Ethan looked at the letter. "Richard Harrington." Emily felt a chill move through her. Richard was her father's older brother, her uncle, and the man who had managed much of the family business after Laura's death. She had always thought of him as dependable, serious, a little distant, Perhaps, but loyal to the family. My uncle, she asked. Ethan nodded. My father believed Richard was hiding something from your mother. Emily stared at him. Why would my father think that? Because Laura had discovered irregularities in the family foundation. Money was being moved between accounts without her approval. Emily shook her head slowly. That cannot be true. My mother trusted Richard. Ethan looked at her gently. Maybe she trusted him before she learned the truth. The waitress returned with fresh coffee, but sensed the tension and quietly left them alone. Emily looked down at the silver locket in her hand. Then why did my mother never tell me? Because you were young. Ethan paused. And because she wanted to protect you from becoming part of the dispute. Emily closed her eyes. Suddenly, memories began returning in fragments. Her mother taking late-night phone calls. Her mother keeping certain documents locked away. The way Laura had once told Emily, when she was only 13, that money could make people forget what mattered most. At the time, Emily had thought it was simply another lesson about humility. Now it sounded like a warning. What happened to the documents? She asked. Ethan looked toward the front window. My father made copies because he was afraid the originals would disappear. Emily leaned closer. Where are those copies now? Ethan took a slow breath. I thought they were gone. You thought? A few months ago, I found an old storage receipt among my father's belongings. I did not know what it was connected to until today. Emily looked at him. Where is the storage unit? 17. The word landed between them. Emily looked at the brass key on the table. The number 17 had been following them from the cemetery to the house, from the house to the diner, and now to a place Daniel Carter had deliberately kept hidden. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded storage receipt. The address was only a short drive away. Emily looked at him. We should go. Ethan nodded. We should. They left the diner just before noon. Lily remained with a trusted neighbor, and Ethan promised he would be back before dinner. The storage facility stood behind a row of small businesses, quiet and ordinary beneath the cloudy sky. Unit 17 was at the far end of the building. Ethan unlocked the door. Inside were boxes covered with years of dust, old furniture, family photographs, and several sealed containers. Emily stepped slowly into the room. She expected documents. Instead, she found something that made her stop. On a wooden shelf sat a small tape recorder beside a handwritten note. Ethan picked up the note. His father's handwriting filled the page. Laura, if Emily ever comes looking, tell her the truth. Tell her I kept my promise. Emily looked at Ethan. There is no tape. Ethan scanned the shelf. Then he noticed a second note beneath the recorder. The recording is with Margaret. Emily's eyes widened. Margaret has it? Ethan nodded. Then we need to find her. Emily turned toward the open storage unit. For the first time, the mystery no longer felt like something buried in the past. It felt like something waiting for them in the present. And somewhere in Boston, Margaret Cole was holding the final piece of a truth Laura had spent years trying to protect. The recording is with Margaret, Emily said again, as if repeating the words might make the answer easier to understand. Ethan stood beside the open storage unit, holding his father's note beneath the pale fluorescent light. Neither of them moved for several seconds. Then Ethan carefully folded the note and placed it inside his jacket. I know where she lives, he said. Emily looked at him. You know where Margaret lives? Not exactly, but my father kept an address book. There was one address beside her name. They left the storage facility shortly after noon. The sky had cleared, but the winter air remained cold and sharp. Ethan drove while Emily sat quietly in the passenger seat, holding her mother's silver locket. For the first time, she was not thinking about the woman she had lost. She was thinking about the woman Laura had been before everything changed. A mother, a friend, a daughter, a woman who had trusted Daniel Carter enough to leave her deepest secret in his hands. After 20 minutes, Ethan turned onto a quiet residential street lined with old brick houses and bare trees. He stopped in front of a small gray cottage. This is it. Emily looked at the house. Are you sure? According to my father's records. Ethan stepped out of the car. Emily followed. Before they reached the front door, it opened. Margaret stood there, wearing a cream-colored sweater and holding a small cassette recorder in both hands. She did not look surprised to see them. You found the storage unit, she said. Ethan nodded. And you found the letter. Margaret looked at Emily. Then you already know enough to hear what Laura wanted you to hear. Emily stepped closer. I need the truth. Margaret gave a small, tired smile. I know. They entered the cottage. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. Family photographs covered one wall, but none showed Laura. Instead, there were pictures of Daniel Carter, younger and smiling, standing beside Margaret and several other friends. Emily noticed a framed photograph on a side table. It showed her mother holding Emily as a little girl. "You kept this?" Emily asked. Margaret nodded. "Your mother gave it to me." "Why?" "Because she wanted someone to remember the happiest part of her life." Emily touched the edge of the frame. "I thought the happiest part was being my mother." "It was," Margaret said. "That is why she made every decision she did." Ethan sat quietly nearby. Margaret placed the cassette recorder on the table. "Your mother recorded this 2 days before she disappeared from public life." Emily looked up. "Disappeared?" Margaret nodded. "People called it a family tragedy. They said she needed time away. They were wrong." Emily felt her chest tighten. "Where did she go?" Margaret did not answer. Instead, she pressed play. A soft crackle filled the room. Then Laura's voice came through. "Margaret, if Emily is ever listening to this, please tell her that I never abandoned her." Emily closed her eyes. Her mother's voice sounded exactly as she remembered it. Warm, calm, familiar. "I know there will be questions," Laura continued. "I know she will wonder why I kept certain things from her. But I needed her to grow up free from the expectations of our family." Emily opened her eyes. Tears gathered silently. Laura continued. "There are people who believe our name gives them the right to decide our future. They are wrong. Emily deserves to choose her own life." Ethan looked down. The recording paused for several seconds. Then Laura spoke again. "Daniel promised to help me protect the truth until Emily was old enough to understand it. If you are hearing this, Daniel kept his promise." Margaret looked at Ethan. He lowered his eyes. Laura's voice became softer. "And if Ethan is standing beside her, then perhaps the promise has become something more beautiful than I ever expected." Emily looked at Ethan. He seemed just as surprised. The recording continued. "Emily, the truth is not about wealth. It is not about inheritance. It is about why I chose to leave certain things behind. I wanted you to know that love can survive silence, distance, and time." Emily wiped a tear from her cheek. Then the recording ended. The room fell completely quiet. Margaret reached for a folder on the table and placed it in front of Emily. "Your mother left one final letter," she said. Emily looked at the envelope. Her name was written across the front. "Why did you wait so long?" Margaret answered gently. "Because Laura told me not to give it to you until you had someone beside you who would not care about your money." Emily looked at Ethan. He said nothing. He did not need to. Margaret pushed the letter toward her. "Your mother believed you would know when you were ready." Emily opened it with trembling hands. The first line made her heart stop. "My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, then you finally found the family I hoped you would choose." Ethan closed the album and rested both hands on the table. "We do not tell anyone about this yet." Emily nodded. "Not even Thomas?" "Especially not Thomas," Claire answered. Lily looked up from the couch, sensing the change in the room even though she did not understand the reason. "Dad, is something wrong?" Ethan softened immediately. "Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart." He walked over and sat beside her. "We're just trying to understand some old family papers." Lily studied his face. "You look worried." Ethan gave her a small smile. "I am thinking. You always think when you are worried." Emily watched them quietly. There was something deeply reassuring about the way Ethan could carry fear without allowing it to spill onto his daughter. He did not pretend the truth was easy. He simply refused to let uncertainty steal the peace of the child beside him. That was quiet strength. That was dignity. Claire returned to the photograph and examined the faded envelope in Laura's hand. "There is something we missed." Ethan looked over. "What?" Claire pointed to the corner of the photograph. "Look at the clock behind them." Emily stepped closer. The photograph had been taken at exactly 3:17 in the afternoon. 17, she whispered. Ethan looked at the brass key. "The locker." Claire shook her head. "Maybe not." She turned the photograph over. Along the bottom edge, almost invisible beneath years of fading, were 3 handwritten numbers. 24, 17, 8. Ethan stared at them. Those could be dates. Emily shook her head. "My mother never wrote dates that way." Claire looked toward the wooden box. "Then perhaps they are instructions." Ethan picked up the second key and turned it beneath the lamp. The number 24 caught the light. "24 opened something," he said. 17 led us here." Emily finished the thought. "And 8 could be the final location." No one spoke. Outside, The first pale light of morning began to settle over the Boston rooftops. The night had passed without giving them all the answers, but it had given them something more valuable, a direction. Ethan reached for his phone. "There is one place my father used to mention." Emily looked at him. "Where?" "An old storage office near the harbor. He called it Room 8. Claire's face changed. "I remember that name." Ethan looked at her. "You do?" "Laura once told me Daniel kept a private file there. She said nobody was supposed to know." Emily felt her breath catch. "Then, that is where we go." Ethan glanced at Lily, who was already beginning to fall asleep again against the couch cushion. He pulled a blanket over her shoulders. "After breakfast." Emily smiled faintly. "You really are going to make breakfast first?" Ethan looked at her with quiet certainty. "My daughter needs breakfast." For the first time since the mystery began, Emily smiled without sadness behind it. The truth could wait another hour. Family could not. And somewhere beyond the morning fog, Room 8 was waiting with the answer Daniel Carter had spent 26 years trying to protect.